We are kicking things off with some really big news coming from the sports world. So the federal government is putting Hockey Canada's funding on ice in the wake of the organization's response to an alleged 2018 sexual assault and subsequent out-of-court settlement. So an independent investigation will now be launched to look into how Hockey Canada dealt with the allegations. So Hockey Canada maintains no federal money was used in the undisclosed settlement. A lot to unpack. Let's first begin with a reaction to this story.
Well, online, it seems like everyone is supporting this funding freeze, and no one seems outraged over the Minister of Sport saying that this is a deeply entrenched culture. Those were his words.
Her words.
And her words,
Yeah.
sorry. And in the past, many Canadians haven't even been able to stomach hearing about that culture. And that culture, I think it's all connected to the sexual assaults, the bullying, the hazing, the racism, the toxic masculinity, the violence. It has been reported on for a long time, but it feels like every time it's reported on, at least in recent years, I know because my name's often attached to anything online when a hockey story comes out, the writer sort of begins to sort of wax poetic about the culture of hockey, the sound of blades on ice, and how could this ever happen in this great sport of ours. They react like it's the first time they've heard about this deeply entrenched culture. But as early as the 60s, the Globe and Mail was publishing a story about this culture called What Happened to Hockey? In the 70s, there were multiple investigations and committees created with the goal of solving violence in hockey from both the parents and kids, little kids on the ice. And in 2020, former NHLer, a person I consider somewhat of a hero, Daniel Carcillo filed a class action suit against the Canadian Hockey League on behalf of players who suffered physical, mental, and sexual abuse during their time playing in the junior league. And 2019, the New York Times wrote, the television personality Jessica Allen drew backlash for criticizing hockey culture in Canada, specifically mentioning white boys who are often bullies. She and her network, CTV, later apologized for those remarks. Think about that. Just 2.5 years ago, I had to apologize for saying something about hockey culture. So it's 2022. I'm a glass half full kind of gal. Maybe this is the moment that things will change, that the country will listen, and organizations may act in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just there for this. Yes.
I mean, Darren, do you follow hockey sports in particular? I mean, culturally, it's not to hockey. This is, some would argue, across many sports.
Well, yeah, it's across sports and it's also across entertainment. The idea that, especially like hockey, junior hockey is a real lottery. Some of these kids are going to go on to be rich and famous people, and people want to protect the people who are going to be rich and famous, and they want to protect their relationship with the people who are going to be rich and famous. And that's the hard thing to break through in sports and entertainment and all that, is people have a vested interest in protecting the perpetrators. And so I think as a culture, from 2.5 years ago, where it was something maybe you would get in trouble for just being like, hey, this seems bad. And I think now kind of the society is kind of like, we should try to stop things that are bad for people who can't stop them themselves. You know what I mean? It's like, and of course that's a good thing. It's good for everyone, and also it creates a culture. You're teaching, these are kids, right, in junior hockey. These are young people learning how to live their lives. And then they grow up and become adults who have learned this behavior and what's okay and what's not okay and how to treat people. And then it happens even in the NHL, and these are adults like Sheldon Kennedy and Kyle Beach, who were victims of crimes as well. And so I think the idea that as a society we should be trying to fix things from the ground up is a pretty good idea. And it's good to see that everyone thinks the funding freeze is a good idea.
I do want to jump on that idea of who's got interests where. When I took a look at the roster of that 2018 juniors team, and I looked at, the juniors, as you said, that's the next stop is probably getting scouted into the NHL if they weren't already.
Right.
There's at least 5 names on that team of, 19, 20, 21 guys from the 2018 team. There's at least 5 who are massive superstars in the NHL today.
Right.
Now, there are allegations that 8 members of the 2018 juniors team sexually gang assaulted a young woman. 8 of a team of, let's say, 20 guys. So I don't know. I'm going to throw a full-blown hypothetical out there because we have 0 details, because there's a lot of secrecy around this and protection, perhaps. What if one of these massive stars in the NHL today gets implicated and named publicly? Will he get named publicly? So this is where I realize when you put the money when you put your money where your mouth is. This is not about hockey. It's not about sports first to me. This is literally a situation where our culture has to ask, whose rights are more important?
Right.
A sports hero's rights or an alleged rape victim? That's the question here. And I hope if you've got daughters and you're sitting somewhere watching this, that you think about the alleged victim here and maybe not your favorite hockey hero.
It's not just young girls who have been implicated, though. There's been many stories about hockey coaches and the treatment of young boys. So but to go back to this particular story, I can't help but wonder, like, as a mother of a son, you know, any mother of any son will tell you they come out no different than anybody else, right? Like, they're young and they're cute and they're vulnerable and they're funny and they're quirky. And so what happens between that stage and what I'm already starting to see in my son's class? He's not particularly sporty. He's surrounded by a bunch of very sporty kids. And already I can feel he feels ostracized. He feels outside of it. And I have this dilemma because I know sports are wonderful for kids. And yet gendered sports, when you talk about that, there is also there's a lot of dark sides.
Yeah.
And because we're not talking about it, and this isn't exclusive to hockey, but I worry about taking this person who's lovely and kind and generous and sweet, and I'm not saying that can't be possible, but it's a bit of a toss of the dice of like, throw them in with this. At what point do things turn toxic, or could they turn hyper masculine in a way that is deeply uncomfortable? Would I know about that? Because many parents will immediately jump to, oh, no, not in my kid's team. No, that isn't happening here. But what if it is and you just can't see it? All I know is that we don't hear allegations of women's hockey teams or women's soccer teams that look like this. We've never heard a story.
Cultural
so there's
problem,
this, in the same way that right now we've been criticizing the Catholic Church, for example. No one is saying Catholicism is terrible. No one is saying that there aren't good people and good leaders and whatever. But what we are saying is that for many years, lots of stuff was going on and it was covered up. And it needs to come to light, and people need to look at their garbage and they need to look at problems in institutions, and they need to do better. So unless we start looking at it critically and being able to say, you know what, yeah, there is a problem, we got to do it, we continue to make the same...
And recognizing that this story is not exceptional.
That's right.
Sadly, as sad as
that is.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what you pointed out, where the minister called it a culture problem. That indicates that it's a systemic institutional problem, that it's not just a few bad apples. Because, you know, in those reports that we have been reading about over the last few days, they've said this wasn't a one-off incident.
No.
There are 2 others that were being investigated. They said that this happens once or twice a year. It's a pattern. So again, to go back to what you're saying, Cynthia, it's a culture. And I think for a long time, a lot of people in this country didn't want to see it that way because it's so closely identified to what certain Canadians identify as being part of the Canadian
identity,
persona, whoever. And, you know, to go back to those kids that you're talking about, and Jaya, it was almost like, you're not Canadian if you don't do this.
Correct.
And you're not Canadian if you don't love it. And you're not Canadian if you don't defend it. And what does defending it look like? Actually not listening to somebody when she's telling the truth. Wow. And so what we have to do is unpack all of that. Can this example do that? I want to have hope, Melissa. I want to have faith in the system, but the cover-ups and the cost and who they're protecting, have always prioritized the superstar men. So I would like to be wrong.
I would like accountability. I want a consequence. I want names. I want accountability to show that we can do something right. For today's hockey players, today's daughters, and the young ones coming up. I want names.